Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
If you live in or travel through Washington, D.C., you've probably noticed National Guard troops around the city. The Trump administration says they're here to help tackle rising violent crime. But what's this move really costing the federal government and the local economy? To break that down, Federal News Network's Eric White spoke with Michael Negron, Senior Fellow for Economic Opportunity at the Center for American Progress.
So, getting past whether or not, who agrees with what on the matter of deploying the National Guard because of so-called crime issues in the D.C. area, they're here, and, that's just a new reality. Who knows how long they'll be here for. What can you tell me about the logistical obstacles that this is going to have to overcome, and just get a ballpark of the kind of costs that we're looking at here for a deployment like this?
First thing I'd say is that this is still a developing situation. We have a couple things that are historic in nature at play. One was the Trump administration, in fact, attempted to commandeer the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department, something that has never been attempted in the 50-plus year history of the Home Rule Act. And then as a part of that move, they've deployed 800 National Guard soldiers. And apparently there are 6 other states that seem to be on track to send another 1,000 plus. So depending on how those develop, we might find ourselves in a few days with 2,000 National Guardsmen in D.C., along with the D.C. Police Department, which, thanks to the intervention of a court, remains under the control of the police commissioner. However, there are some new rules in place around immigration enforcement, which is putting D.C. police into the position of essentially acting contrary to the sanctuary city law that has been on the books for a while. So we have this unprecedented insertion of federal military power into the district for law enforcement purposes. Based on the reporting that I've seen, these National Guardsmen are deployed into tourist-heavy areas, not really the areas that have historically suffered from higher crime in the district. Of course, layered over all of this is the fact that crime in the district is down 26% in 2025. Violent crime is down 26% compared to 2024, a fact that the president himself acknowledged in early May when he was trying to defend his nominee for U.S. attorney at the time, Ed Martin, where he praised that reduction in violent crime for the district. So 3 months later, it's a national emergency, despite what he said several months ago. And so we have this unprecedented deployment. The costs are unclear at the moment in terms of federal taxpayer dollars. It's worth noting that the 2-month deployment of 5,000 National Guardsmen to Los Angeles had a price tag of about $134 million. So that's a helpful benchmark in thinking about what this might cost us right now. It looks like the Trump administration is viewing this as a 30-day deployment, but they are teasing that they may ask Congress to go longer. So we may end up, depending on how many other states try to join this operation, the cost could end up being somewhat similar. However, we've seen some early costs now just to the local economy. There is OpenTable, which is the online service for reservations. That is probably the biggest reservation service. OpenTable data has showed that restaurant reservations fell by over 25% compared to what it was prior to the president's ordering of the National Guard into D.C. And the latest data has that reservations are down 22% compared to a year ago. So we see that it is an outlier, and it's almost certainly driven by this deployment of troops into the district.
Well, it is also very expensive to go out to D.C. dinners, right?
Yeah, so that's true. However, people were willing to do it. About a quarter more people were willing to do it a month ago. And so, the tariffs are driving up the costs for people, but I don't think they have changed cost that much in a week. And so it really does seem to be driven by the presence of these soldiers. Now, the thing is that, look, a lot of people probably see the soldiers and feel better about safety in the district, but a lot of people don't. And there's just the element of hassle, right? The notion of, if there's going to be a lot of federal troops present in D.C., what's that mean for my drive? Is there going to be an incident? Are there going to be protests because of this presence of troops? And so many people appear to be deciding to stay home for the moment, given the what they're seeing on the news, as well as the uncertainty that is currently present, because it's not clear how long they're going to be around. It's not clear if more are coming. It's not clear how people are going to react to it. And so that uncertainty itself has a cost for businesses as well as for households.
Let's hone in on the troops actually on the ground here. Is this what they had in mind when they enlist in the National Guard? Are they trained for a job like this? And, as you mentioned, they don't know, there's no real timeline there. Do National Guard troops typically have a timeline that they're given when they are deployed? How does that aspect factor into this?
Yes, well, folks join the National Guards for all kinds of reasons. In terms of what they're typically trained to do, they are not typically trained to do police work, law enforcement work. They help with maintaining order after, say, a disaster. They can help with providing relief to people in the event of a disaster. Of course, they're National Guards who, during our operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, would deploy overseas as part of those operations. And so the notion of deploying the National Guard into an American city to help with police work and to keep violence down, that is not something that they have been trained for. And just in terms of what it means for these National Guardsmen, my understanding, although this may be changing, is that nearly all of them have been without a weapon, right? So they are just standing as a physical, visible presence, again, in these areas that are largely occupied by tourists and not really a focus of crime rates. And so it also calls into question what the ultimate purpose of these folks are. They're not trained to do this. They don't appear to be armed, and they're not where the actual violence is, which is actually a good thing, just from the perspective of what they're actually equipped to do. But it gives this whole thing the air of more about PR and potentially distracting from less friendly headlines than to be actually about lowering crime in the district. And again, while the district has seen a major decrease in violent crime, there's always more work to do. One crime is too many, and a place where the president could really have an impact is restoring the $1 billion in cuts that the district is slated to get, thanks to the continuing resolution that the Republicans passed earlier this year. There was a bipartisan effort in the Senate to fix that. It didn't go anywhere in the House. The president could get involved and could insist, I'd like to see something happen. However, I also want to see more funding for police officers or other policing tools to help get violence down. That would have a real impact, not this deployment of 800 to maybe potentially 2,000 troops who appear to be not in the places where the crime's happening.
Yeah, with more states volunteering to send troops along to help this effort, will that bring the cost to the federal government itself down? Will the states bear that burden? Do you know anything about how that aspect works?
I believe the federal government is shouldering the majority of these costs. The addition of additional soldiers from other National Guards units in other states really just increases the headcount, which contributes to the cost of the operation. I don't believe it provides any alleviation in terms of cost. And if anything, it will amplify the economic impact as you have more and more of a presence in D.C. It suggests that we may have something of a bunker mentality in the district. What we ideally would happen is that this decline in reservations, decline in business traffic is a blip that comes back up after people see, okay, well, things aren't that different, so I'm going to go back and go have a good time in the district. But if it continues to look like a developing situation with uncertainty, you could see these numbers for reservations for people visiting the city start to stay down, and that will affect how many shifts a business owner assigns, whether workers are getting are able to work the shifts that they normally expect and getting the pay that they normally expect. And that's how you start to have a bad cycle where business activity goes hand in hand with employment levels, and that wouldn't be a good thing. So uncertainty generally is bad for business, bad for consumers, and uncertainty is written all over this operation.
Yeah, you had mentioned we have some precedent here. The Trump administration did deploy the National Guard in Los Angeles when there was so-called disturbances happening there. Was there any analysis done once the troops did end up leaving on the effect that it had on the area? Did you all take a look at that at all?
Yes, well, Governor Newsom, a couple weeks ago, he made a Freedom of Information Act request to get more information about the costs of that deployment of National Guardsmen to Los Angeles. And in the making of that request, he included some analysis that the state of California and some of its partners had done as to the economic impact of that deployment. And what they found was that people showed up to work. The level of showing up to work declined about 3%, starting with that deployment. and that the aggressive immigration tactics that took place during that deployment and that have generally been taking place since the president took office are on track to take about $300 billion out of the California economy, given how dependent that economy is on the labor of immigrants. And so that is one example. And of course, it is still early. But what we're seeing in D.C. is certainly consistent with a negative economic impact. And so hopefully we don't see the same prolonged deployment here, given that the economy, particularly the hospitality economy, had been reeling from just such a drop in people coming into the office to work for the federal government, for private employers. And with the return to office, we had started to see more activity coming back to the streets and to stores and to restaurants. And this threatens to reverse that trend.
Michael Negron is a senior fellow for the Center for American Progress. Thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thank you. Anytime.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.